Hey everybody, Bridget Dolgoff, Conscious Economics and Urban Farm Project. It has been a tough ass winter. But yesterday and today were like the first couple of days that the sun actually has been really shining. And so being in the desert, it's kind of an interesting thing when it's so dark and no sun. So I think a lot of people have kind of like, kind of have some depression. So anyway, I wanted to talk today about something that that I'm not really, I'm just going to have to tell like some stories, right? So we're moving into a time frame where let's just say the energy of the sun, the plasma something or other. I mean, the things that we see in the roof, above us are not really kind of what we see. And a lot of people that are using cameras now are starting to see that they are not, what we're told they are, right? Are made up. So I, have done a lot of like native spirituality work stuff, with the grandmothers and grandfathers, including, the sun, and just kind of, overall studied a lot of this kind of stuff. So I'm just coming from my perspective. There are beings that operate, let's just say, probably enormous beings. And let's just say you're in an aquarium, right? Or a chicken, in a chicken house, right? And the winter time comes and the humans, which seem, pretty big, come in, put light fixture in there, to help with heat or start to insulate it, make changes to your reality. And that's the same kind of thing that kind of happens up in the roof, that periodically people have captured beings implementing stuff into the sun fixture, maybe removing things, changing them. So there's been a whole control aspect of it. So we're getting ready for a shift. And the frequency is supposed to change so that our eyesight, we can see things that we haven't been able to see before without certain types of lights. And so basically, in my practice over years and years and years, 30 some odd years, I was a shaman. I was born kind of a shaman long before I started doing healthcare, osteopathic work, nutrition, herbal medicine, and acupuncture and medical intuitive work. I probably did shaman, medical intuitive work because people, were coming to me like in my late teens, and I would help them, with things that were far beyond, a normal person's, understanding. But I want to talk to you about what's going to happen. And supposedly this is like, the Christ consciousness. We could call it the second coming, if you will. Rudolf Steiner talks a lot about Christ and the mystery of Golgotha, Golgotha, and about how at a certain point in time, a sun being, Christ, came into a physical form to kind of help us, get back redirected. So, goes back to a lot of that other stuff. So, in a lot of the shamanism work that I've learned over the years, dealing with the sun, my hat's going to start to fall off. It's cold. A lot of it has to do, the sun, fire ceremonies and the sun. And the sun has a lot of, aspects for the human being. We couldn't survive without it. So when this changes, when the sun frequency changes, it's probably going to be pretty hard on a lot of beings who have been in hiding, because we can't see the spectrum in which they are. It's also going to be difficult for the, human hybrids. And it's going to be really difficult for humans. Like, a lot of people are excited about this and they, can't wait for it. But there's a really horrific aspect to this. And that aspect has to do with people not having done their spiritual work, right? So if you haven't done your spiritual work, you haven't accepted, sometimes they call it the shadow work. You haven't really accepted and worked with, managed, and dealt with the, darker aspects of who you are. So I'm going to tell a story. I use shamanism, the underlying principle of it, and the energy mediums of it, and the aspects of being able to change the energy bodies and the fields, and also trying to unify the bodies. There's I see 8 different types of bodies. We have ether body, astral body, emotional body, mental body, physical body. And all of these are in conflict with most people. And the worst aspect is the emotional body, because usually wherever the emotional body is, or wherever the physical body is, the emotional body is far, far, far away. People are totally detached. And the emotional body is part of, dealing with the darker aspects of ourselves, or the darker aspects that we were handed down from other generations to clean up, and we don't clean them up. So we have this compounded stuff. And so a long time ago, regular acupuncture just wasn't really working for me in my practice. And so working with some other people, I eventually kind of picked up other ideas and aspects to be able to not just bring cosmic energy or ether energy in, which we would call free energy, into the body using the acupuncture needles. I love to do acupuncture on the land. Love that. I love changing so many different things. And so what I do now, I call it structural acupuncture. And so it's a lot different, because I needed something that was more sports injury inclined, because a lot of, I do get nowadays probably 50-50. Illness, 50% injury, chronic injury. But back in the day, it was mostly injury. So I really needed something that I could use to shift what I couldn't shift with my hands or nutrition or herbal medicine, and be able to change, what we call the assemblage point, and to a different place. And the assemblage points, are held within the energy body, but the emotional body has to be like, all these bodies have to be connected, and then you can kind of shift. You can shift them. There's been different people over time that have done different ways of, managing the different points. So if I can manage you to move into a certain aspect or point for like a short period of time that can raise your clarity, it can actually help you to remove that obstacle and block. Now, the kind of work I do, two things that happen. People get well really fast. That scares them. Some people have been living with their illnesses and stuff like that as a weapon against other people, or a weapon to, keep their space. I'm sick, leave me alone, kind of a thing. I'm sick, I'm going to go in my bedroom. I'm sick, I'm hurting, and so I don't have to deal with you. So a lot of sickness and illness are, weapons of mass destruction on an energy level against our reality. It's a coping mechanism. So, I don't know. This story is from about 10 years ago. So I'm going to explain this because changing people's frequency is difficult, and people don't want that. People are not prepared for that. And even if you help to change their frequency and help them to pick up the negative, they can't do it. It's too intense. It's like way too intense. So mine is like fast tracking, I fast track people, but it's a very small percentage, maybe 5% of the population who can handle this kind of, wellness. So I'm always kind of, worried about what's going to happen when they release new technology, and they haven't really helped the population, the human population, to deal with the emotional stuff. And fast tracking them will only fast track them into more sickness. So I'll tell you two stories. First story is back when I was 23 years old. I ended up working with a Lakota Sioux medicine woman from a very famous bloodline. And I worked with her for about a year, and kind of learning what she does. And we had people that came in, and it's really a long story. I mean, like, her and my life were like parallel. I just didn't know it at that time. But it's just a really long, crazy story. But anyway, so basically, we had this woman come in, and she had a tumor in her back. And so my teacher, during the session, pulled out the energy, basically the tumor energetically. And, some people could have visible bruising on the skin. Some people, even though she didn't even touch them. And just lots of other stuff, as a sign of removal. So the woman leaves, and My teacher says, you can, go to the doctor and it'll be gone and whatever else. And so she leaves, and my teacher says, she'll be back within 6 months with something worse, because she's not prepared to be healthy, and her archetypal patterns are running, victimization, this, that, or the other thing. It's just she's gotten really good at creating cancer, developing cancer in herself as a coping mechanism to deal with the things that she doesn't want to deal with. In the end, it always sucks, because people die, and on their deathbeds they say, oh, I really wish I would have done something different, So we'll call it most disease and accidents and injuries are emotional, undealt with emotional states. You have to deal with, oh, by the way, she went to the doctor the next day, blood tests, everything was gone. 6 months later, she came back, and then she ended up dying of what she brought forth, because couldn't deal with the emotions and couldn't deal with, aspects, past, present, and future. And so that was that. The second story, so we're talking about what happens when there's an immediate frequency change. The frequency changes and changes you, but you still haven't dealt with whatever, is there. And also, to a degree, we have to deal with the 7 generations behind us as well, and our stuff, right? So there's just a lot. And I think doing the kind of work I've been doing for over 30 years, well, probably my whole life, I call it like resurrection medicine, because that's the first thing that I learned how to do as a little kid. And you can go to my website, coe-llc.com, and there's About Bridget, and it talks about kind of the first section of my life, and so you can go ahead and check that out. So I've always been kind of ahead of the curve. I've always been considerably different in the type of medicine that I've done, all aspects of medicine. I mean, I think that my favorite medicine probably would have been wilderness medicine, like severe emergency type medicine. I just didn't really make it in search and rescue and stuff like that, because, I don't know, I guess men just had a serious conflict with me, and I've just kind of always been overly educated and asked too many questions, so it was a problem. But anyway, I would have loved that. I think that would have been, like it for me. But anyway, as it is, I have a private practice, have for a long time. So second story, and this kind of stuff happens a lot, and usually this is the breakaway moment where people stop coming to me, because they don't want to deal with this kind of stuff. So I had this client, this was about, I don't know, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago. They were up in Lake Tahoe, and I was going up there to see them, and they just had a lot of chronic injuries that had happened to their head. They had like lots of kind of eye problems. Really good shape, worked out a lot, pretty healthy person, like mid-60s, blah, 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 blah. And, there were some blockages that I just couldn't seem to get past. So I said, hey, how about we try some acupuncture? And because my acupuncture is a little bit different, I'm stimulating, moving the assemblage point. I'm also stimulating, bringing up the block. I'm also stimulating, bringing cosmic forces in, and all forces kind of in. And, and bringing that emotional body close. So, my focus is just a lot different. So he was laying on his back, and I, did my work, left the room for about 25 minutes just to let him kind of undulate without me impacting his trip, and to see what was going to happen, see if we were going to be able to merge some of his systems or not, and to see if he understood and see what his trip was, what kind of vision or whatever else that he had. Anyway, so when I come back in the room and, I clean him up and, and he sits up and he looks at me and he says, yeah, I didn't really like that experience. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, when I was laying there, I was above myself, but I was a ghoul. He said that's the only word that he said that I could put on it. Like, I didn't really like how I looked. And I said, well, how do you know it was you? And he said, I just knew it was me, but it was ghoulish. Like, I was ghoulish. And, I had to talk to him about, that's what happens. This is when the soul starts to show you who your soul feels you are. And in the early years, I used to think, well, maybe it's because these people were like hybrids, and like these aspects were their cosmology, their where they were from. And then over time, I've realized that it's how the soul sees you. And so being able to move those points within the energy body to show exactly what's going on to the person, so they can either accept it and start to do the work, or they keep doing what they're doing. And then they remain with all these problems and probably will die with them. So comes back to the sun and the frequency change. The frequencies change. What it's going to do is it's going to toss up these aspects. Not only toss up our aspects, but they're going to toss up all the aspects of how our soul sees ourselves and what we have done, what we've engaged in, what our behavior is. And so that's what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that there isn't enough information out there about this kind of stuff. And there isn't enough support for this kind of work. And we live in an environment, and especially as Americans, in loathing and self-hate. And this gets us to do things that make us hate things about ourselves, which forces our emotional body further and further away. And the further away that emotional body is, the more, ugly, the more, could throw up aspects of our fear, worst fears, could throw up aspects of how, we see ourselves, like from the spirit angle. And so what I'm telling you is that, and that person, that saw themselves as a ghoul, like never arranged another appointment, and from what I heard kept, doing the same business, and changed nothing about their life. And sometimes I think like that's a miracle. Like, I produced a miracle. I produced you seeing or feeling or understanding something about yourself that is dark, that you can actually, once you know what it is, or you've had a sighting or a feeling, excuse me, that now you have the ability to like correct. That's a miracle. But people don't see it that way. So this morning I was like laying in bed at like, well, it was cold. I woke up, it was pretty cold. So I just got up and flicked the heater on and got back in bed with my hot pad, and my dog curled up underneath because she was cold. And I just contemplated this and about how do you talk about something like this? How do you discuss something like this? So I think people really kind of need to prepare, because the truth is ugly, and our personal truth is ugly, and our shadows are very ugly, and especially with the emotional body and the hate and the anger. So anyway, if the sun changes and the frequency changes, it could be a very tumultuous, frightening, and terrifying period as we, clean up our mess. And there's always the choice. I mean, people may off themselves, or people may kill the people who they feel have caused it or whatever else. But the frequency changes, you're going to see and feel, everything. You're not going to have all the separation, and it's going to be, you're going to have to deal with it. So it may not be good for a lot of people. And like I said, probably time to start doing some personal work, emotional work. And just so you know, I'm always available online for sessions. And if you feel like, you need help moving forward. All right, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks so much. Have a great day.